Hello, I am Larry Bell. I live in Taos, New Mexico, and I'm a sculptor. I liked to draw cartoons when I was in school, in high school, and I was not a very good student, but on occasion I turned in homework in the form of a comic book, and I always got good grades when I did stuff like that. So I chose to go to an art school that was a training ground for Disney's animators. The technical aspects of film business were no interest to me whatsoever. I was only interested in the cartoon thing and not the business of cartoon thing. So I left the program that had to do with becoming an animator, focused on becoming a painter, because I really liked the people that were teaching painting and sculpture and stuff like that. Basically, they were preparing you for unemployment. There was a time in art school, very well respected instructor of drawing, and he talked about the energy that drawing represented. The teacher had covered the walls with figure studies that different students had done over the years. His talking about the energy of the drawing, the act of drawing, had nothing to do with figures. It had to do with something else. The evidence of what I interpreted the things to be were just squares that related to the shape of the page plane. It was the shape of the page that determined what I put down on the page. The school had brought in somebody who was kind of an aesthetic advisor. After one session with the guy, I came back to the little apartment I shared with a fellow. He said, "You seem very chipper today. What's making you so happy?" I said, "Well, I just had a session with this person." My friend looked at me. He said, "You crazy?" He said, "The school brought that guy in to weed out the weirdos." And my whole trip just burst. When I got out of art school, I got a job in a picture framing shop. The glass had to fit into the inside of a frame because the business of the store was selling picture frames with glass in them. I found it a fascinating material and found myself playing around with the spare leftover bits of glass, and I started making little constructions, little boxes. On one, I cut the glass a little bit too tight, and when I set it into the little groove that held the glass part to the box, the glass broke almost in half. I decided to just finish what I was doing, and that included putting a piece of blue paper on the back, sealing the piece of glass into the notch that was in the wood. When I turned the piece over, I was immediately struck by the fact that the crack caused 3 lines to appear on the blue paper. One was the shadow of the crack. The other was the crack itself. Above it was the reflection of the crack. Every time I would start to wonder whether I was doing anything right, I'd just have to look at that piece. And it reminded me of the importance of spontaneity and improvisation and also intuition, to trust those things. Well, I've always thought of my work as my teacher, and that's the way I've proceeded with my life. I follow the work. Assume you were going to ask who who was the most influential on me. It was an artist named Robert Irwin. I got to be a very close friend with. And probably the most important thing that he provided to his students was an avenue to trusting themselves. And that was probably the most important lesson that I ever had. If you don't trust yourself, then life is pretty miserable. But he was a very funny guy. He had a great sense of humor, and that said, he was very serious about what he did. A sculptor friend of mine named Kenneth Price, who was a very long-time friend, and he was a ceramicist, and he made little cups, very strange kind of amorphic forms that he painted. I first saw Kenny's work in around 1958, 59. They sat with such majesty. Those works probably influenced me the most in terms of how to place something and how to expect it to be. Sadly, a dear friend named Eric Orr and I attempted to do some projects together. Eric passed away some years ago to mine and the art world's loss. I think he was a fantastic artist and more of a conceptual guy than I was. But offhand, I can't really describe any of the things that we collaborated on that ever manifest themselves in the real world. They were more just the way we jived with each other. I purchased a piece of equipment that in New York City, actually, in 1965, when I came to New York for a show with the Pace Gallery. In shipping the work to the city, a couple of pieces were damaged. I proceeded to try and find somebody who could help repair the things. I located somebody here in New York that was in the business of coating decorative items. He sold me a piece of equipment he wasn't using that did that kind of plating, and gave me a book called Vacuum Deposition of Thin Films, and said, you start on page 1. And he walked out. I used that book and understand something about the procedures that would allow me to do this coating process. I had a passion for the writings of the English author H.G. Wells. His stories were fantastic. He was a fantastic writer. And a book was published about Wells's career, and the writer interviewed Wells about different issues like we're talking about. And one of the questions that the writer asked Wells was how he made the transition from being a journalist, which is what he was in the beginning of his career, to being a successful novelist. How did he make the transition from that? And his answer, so striking to me, he said he felt it wiser to write a series of striking, if unfinished, stories rather than to be forgotten while he elaborated a masterpiece. Well, that hit me right between the eyes, because it was exactly the way I felt about working. You don't try and elaborate a masterpiece, you just work. When I read that, I began to have a feeling why I liked his writing so much. There was a spirit of adventure in what he did, and I picked up on that feeling. And in my world, as far as I'm concerned, art is about feeling. It's not about anything else. We put up an exhibition here in New York in Madison Square Park. It's the first time I've ever put sculptures up around trees and grass and squirrels. I've put my sculptures in very pristine, empty rooms and walled-in yards and minimally decorated kinds of places. But this installation was a real eye-opener for me because it integrated all of the things that I like about my sculptures, except in an environment that was animated by nature. Shadows and leaves and trees and sunshine and all of that, making an extraordinary changing environment with these very rigid, quiet forms sucking up the sun, reflecting it back. Madison Square Park is a beautiful little green area in the middle of the concrete jungle. The pieces are amazingly happy there. I never thought I'd see a piece of happy glass, which makes me quite happy. So this show would probably be the most important that comes to mind in answer to your question. I've said this many times to people that there's 4 really important tools in an art studio, and maybe in any field whatsoever: spontaneity, improvisation, intuition, and trust are the 4 most important tools that anybody can have in any venture, especially an art studio. So you have to trust yourself, let things happen, and believe that there's value in letting it happen. And the best things usually happen when you're not thinking about controlling them.